everyone. Thank you so much for attending our first Equity and Inclusion Parent Workshop series of the 2018-2019 school year. We believe that tonight's topic discussion on navigating conversations about race and racism with your children will provide valuable insights and spark lively conversations. It is my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. Dr. Jeffries is an associate professor of history at the Ohio State University. Our partnership with Dr. Jeffries extends back to 2013 when he presented at our One Community Equity and Inclusion Conference. The public feedback that we received about Dr. Jeffries was so remarkable that we've partnered with him on additional district initiatives and workshops over the past few years. This includes, at our most recent One Community, a workshop on how to create environments to support excellence for African American students in our schools. A published author and notable speaker, Dr. Jeffries has participated in several public history projects, including being the lead historian and primary scriptwriter for the 5-year, $25 million renovation of the National Civil Rights Museum. It's located at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, the site of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Born in Brooklyn, New York, Dr. Jeffries graduated summa cum laude from Morehouse with a bachelor's degree in history and earned a master's degree and PhD in American history with a specialization in African American history from Duke University. He taught for a year at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa before joining the faculty at The Ohio State University in 2003. Tonight's format is going to be a 30-minute presentation by Dr. Jeffries, followed by a Q&A session. So part of this session will address pre-submitted questions by attendees, and the remaining time will be an open floor discussion. So please know that we received over 35 questions through our RSVP form, so we won't be able to answer every question. However, we have kind of divided the submissions into themes that arose to try to best address all the topics that came up. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffries.
Thank you very much. It is a real delight to be here with you this evening. I am going to slide this out of the way, and I'm going to try to project my voice without the microphone. See if I can do it. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. That's my teacher voice. That's my teacher voice. It is really a pleasure to be here with you today. When I was talking with Heather and Jackie about what we might do literally over the course of the year last year, and talking about the issues of diversity and inclusion here, and the usual things came up, right? Support to talk to teachers, to support to talk to students. But we collectively said it's important to talk to parents, because parents have a primary role in how our kids see and understand and make sense of race and racism in American society. And we said that's where you have to begin. And so that's where we're going to begin. So I really am glad to see so many out here today. And I hope the things that I share will prove helpful. And I got some homework for you at the end. And I look forward to sort of the engaging and informative conversation. One thing, one of my friends asked me, why do you, any question that begins with why do you, you enjoy doing these sort of workshops and talking to parents and teachers on these tough questions, right? I mean, this is not easy stuff, right? This is hard stuff to talk about. And, you don't have to do that. And I said, yeah, I know I don't, but I learn from it too, right? It's sharing what I know. It's sharing what I've learned, but I learn from it too. So I'm also navigating how to have these conversations about race and racism. It's no longer a theoretical proposition for me because I have 3 little girls, age 3, age 6, and age 8 going on 18. So this is real for me. I've been trying to work through all of this myself. So hopefully I guarantee I'm going to pick some stuff up in the conversation. So I thank you in advance for helping me in my house. The aim for this evening is real simple. You don't have to jot it down, but just to keep in mind that this is the purpose for this evening, to raise awareness and understanding of the way that race and racism function in our society. That's the starting point. is making sure that we understand that both race and racism, I'll say more about that, are both in a second sort of what they mean and why they are meaningful, but how they function and operate in our society. Now, for some of us, maybe everyone in this room, we take for granted that both race and racism are functional factors in our lives. But you will be surprised about how many people are operating and living life under the assumption that both race is meaningless and racism is non-existent. And so it's important for us just to establish right now that that's not us in this room. All right, we are operating under the assumption that this stuff is real and impactful, and we will unpack it a little bit going forward. And the reason why we have to, this is the starting point, is because if we understand that, we understand the ways race and racism operate in our society, we will be better able, it will better enable us as parents, throw myself in there, to prepare our children for the world in which we live. To prepare our children for the world in which we live. And I'm very much of the mind that that is our primary task as parents, as well as teachers and educators, to prepare our children for the world in which we live, and to be frank and candid and honest about all elements of that world. That's what we do as parents. That's what we do as teachers and as educators. And so that's part of the purpose, to help strengthen that among us, well, within us. Why is discussing race so difficult? Why is discussing race, we're talking about racism itself. Why is discussing race so difficult? I argue that it's so difficult in part because it's not real. Race, as a concept, as a construct, is not real. It is biologically meaningless. Race is biologically meaningless. There is no fundamental difference between white folk, or who we identify as white folk, and black folk in this room or in the world. When we look at our DNA and what it means, there is no real difference. Race is meaningless from a biological perspective. It's meaningless. But it's where it gets tricky. Biologically, race means nothing. But socially, it means almost everything. Socially, it has meaning. And by socially, I mean within society. So when you hear academics talk about like race is socially constructed, and my students now come into class, they're like, well, what is race? Well, Dr. Jeffries, race is socially constructed. I'm like, okay, very good. Now, what does that mean? I'm like, well, we didn't get to that part. It's socially meaning that society places value on what we identify as race. We ascribe value, we ascribe characteristics to race. So although race is biologically meaningless, socially, it has real meaning. It's one of the first things, psychologists tell us, it's one of the first things that people look for when they meet somebody and try to make sense of. Like, what race are you? Right? That's one of the first, whether consciously or unconsciously, the two things that we know that Americans do when they meet somebody to try to put them and make sense of who they are is identify their race and gender. The two things that we do. And all of the cultural baggage that comes along with that, we project onto people. Some of that is good, some of that is bad. Some of that we're aware of, some of that we're not aware of. But that's what we do. And although it has no biological meaning, that says a lot about because that's the moment and point of our interaction. And we don't drop it easily. It's not like that's our first filter and then we move away. That carries forward. And even in those situations where we develop intimate and personal relationships with people of different races, that does not guarantee that those stereotypes that we harbor about the race goes away. That explains why you can have little white kids in the suburbs with posters of LeBron James and love black athletes and love Beyonce, and still harbor the same negative stereotypes about black folk they will meet who they don't know. The two can coexist. The two can coexist. Race isn't real biologically meaningless, but it is socially meaningful and it is culturally relevant. So socially meaningful in the sense that, again, that we ascribe value to it as members of society. It is culturally relevant, though, because we often substitute race for culture. It's a standard. So when we talk about sort of a distinct African American culture or British culture or European culture or West African culture, in part what we're talking about, like when we talk about black folk or African folk or European folk or white folk, we're talking about their cultural understandings, the way in which they move through the world, their cultural heritage. And this is important, right? Understanding that race is culturally meaningful because we use it as a standard for understanding culture. Because if you fall into the trap, and I'll say more about this later, about color blindness, I don't see race. What you're actually doing is refusing to acknowledge people's culture. So what you want to accomplish is not sort of not seeing race. That was a double negative, English teacher name. You don't want to ignore race. You don't want to discriminate on the basis of race. But you want to recognize people's culture, right? and the value of it. So let's see this in mind. It's difficult because you got to make sense of this. And if you're trying to talk to kids, right, this is illogical. Like race is real, it's not real, it is real, it's meaningful, it's not. Like, what does that mean? I did one of those the ancestry DNA tests. Now I knew I wasn't 99% Nigerian. That's just the reality of being black in America, right? But it came back, and I was, I had the West African, I had the Ghanaian, I had the Ivory Coast in there, all added up, to 60%, so I was feeling pretty African at that time. But then I had this 15%. This 15% from Great Britain. I was like, well, what does that mean? Right? I was like, do I get 15% off the next ticket? I get what I can go, like, look, I'm cashing in my white card here. It's meaningless, right? It's meaningless. Nobody sees the 15%. You don't see what that is in my children, right? But it's there. Somehow it's there, right? So that's genetic DNA. So how do you explain that to your kids? How do I explain to my daughter? Well, there's 15% Great Britain in there, and we don't know where it comes from, and we don't really know what it means, but it doesn't count for anything but this, that, and the other, right? The reason why it's so hard, probably so hard to have these conversations, is because it's illogical. You're trying to put logic to something that is illogical. And kids are good at telling you when something doesn't make sense. Like, Daddy, that makes no sense. He's like, all right, well, go talk to your mom. So that's why talking about race is so difficult. Why is talking about racism difficult? Right? A lot of times we're like, look, we're going to have a conversation on race. I've given up. I no longer accept invitations to have conversations on race. I'm like, look, we need to have a conversation on racism. Right? Like, you can invite me to that. Why is this? Because the past is painful. Talking about racism. The past, our collective past, as people living in America, is painful. When I talk about the past is painful, I'm talking about racism. I'm talking about racism, not that 50% great, I'm talking about racism is in our DNA. Racism is inscribed into the DNA of American society. Recently, I've been doing some work with the folk at James Madison's estate, Montpelier. James Madison, the 4th president of the United States, did this wonderful exhibit on African American enslavement at the plantation. At James Madison, the 4th president of the United States, had over 100 enslaved people, over 300 over 3 generations, never freed a single soul. James Madison is the architect of the Bill of Rights, the father of the Constitution. I went down there, and I was invited down there to do a workshop. They were doing this exhibit on slavery there. And we take a tour of James Madison's house, plantation manor, if you will. It's upstairs. You go into the library. There were 3,000 books there. And it looks over these mountains and these pastures. And it's quite beautiful, right? I mean, it literally is. But you do have to keep in mind that this was also a slave labor camp, right? But it's beautiful. So you go through this tour, and taking us to a special tour just to see what's what. And then we go downstairs into the cellar area, the basement area, right? So 2 levels upstairs, and there's a cellar downstairs. And downstairs was really the province of African Americans. That's where enslaved black folk did most of their work, who worked in the house, right? That was downstairs. So they're transforming that into this exhibit space to tell the history and experiences of black folk who were working as enslaved people on James Madison's plantation. And as we're going through one of the, and it's not fabricated yet, so they're still putting this stuff in, and as we're going through, the educational director, a wonderful fellow by the name of Chrissy Cox, says, you know, I want you all to just put your hand on the wall, right? It's a brick, it's a cellar, it's underground. Put your hand on the wall, whitewashed, and just run your, don't look, but just run your fingers along the wall. And immediately when he said that, I thought about my girls, especially my youngest one, who every time we get out of the car, she takes her fingers and runs them along the car. And I was like, stop, right? It's dirty, and then she'll put it in her mouth, and I'm like, oh, like you're killing me, right? And so he's saying, you know, run your hand along the wall, and I'm thinking about Alayla, right, doing that, right? So I sort of get distracted, and then he sort of brings us back. He brings us back and says, what do you feel, right? So I kind of snap back out, and you know, I mean, it's a brick wall, right? So like, you know, I feel rigid, right? I feel mortal, and he says, no. Feel inside the brick. Feel inside the brick. And when you do that, you feel ridges inside the brick. They're not very big, but they're clear. Because now, look at what you're feeling. And when you look at what you're feeling, what those ridges are, you realize that they are very small handprints. Because all of the bricks made at James Madison's plantation were made by enslaved children. So the library in which James Madison drafted the Bill of Rights, the father of the Constitution, rests on a foundation of bricks that were made by enslaved children. Now, how do I explain that to my 3-year-old? And what do I do with that when we're talking about patterns that had she been born in the era that we love to celebrate? She, at 3 and 4 and 5 years old, would have been making bricks. Slavery and capitalism, twin pillars of American society, are intertwined. That's the DNA. And slavery is just an extension and manifestation of racism. Racism and capitalism, the twin pillars of American society. So when we say, why is it hard to talk about racism? Because that is foundational to who we are as a nation. And unless we're prepared to have those conversations, then we're not going to have a serious conversation down the road. The past is painful. Slavery, Jim Crow, discrimination, racial violence, racial terror, denying people options and opportunities. Some benefit, some don't. That's the history of America that we often don't want to talk about because it's painful. The present is painful too. The present is painful too. So not only do we not want to deal with the past, we don't even want to deal with the present. I'm originally from New York, as I say earlier, and a few of you may remember when Eric Garner, African American of Staten Island, died at the hand of police. Well, at Ohio State, so I'm a news junkie, but I'm also a person who studies African American issues, studies politics, and so I keep up with the news. And so I was following this very closely. The students at Ohio State were very animated about this, about what was happening. And they were having, one evening, they were having a teaching. They invited myself and some other faculty members to just talk about this history with them. And so I try to sort of monitor and censor what I watch in front of my children, especially as they have gotten older. But, it's on TV. Sometimes they will come in the room and I will put it on mute, but when this stuff gets viral, it's sort of it's on a constant loop, And so I'm trying to make sure that my kids are sort of not really seeing it. And this one day, this one night, when we're going, I'm literally getting packing my bags to head out to go back to campus. This is sort of playing in the background on the news on side. And my daughter, who was 4 years old at the time, right, is looking at it and turns to me and says, and she's watching these videos, right, in the corner while people talking about Eric Garner being chosen. He says, is that how I'm going to die? Is that how I'm going to die? How do I explain that to a little 4-year-old guy? That's not the past, that's the present. That's not everybody, but that's immediate. What do you do with that? That's why I'm talking about racism, because that's complicated. You got to unpack that. That's why I'm talking about racism. So it's home. It's real. It's meaningful. And the persistence of racial stereotypes. Persistence of racial stereotypes. So it's not only, we'll unpack this a little bit about individual behavior, individual prejudice versus systematic racism, but the persistence of racial stereotypes is real. So I got these little girls, right? And one of the things that we all do, as parents is we try to do what? We try, no matter what your racial background is, we try to preserve their innocence, especially as young children. So one of the first questions that people ask me all the time, well, when should I begin to talk about the questions of race and racism with my children, right? And the inclination is like, hold off as long as you can, right? To preserve that innocence. We'll talk about why that actually is the wrong thing. But my 4-year-old, I'm sitting at home, minding my business, trying to do some work before I gotta go catch them. Before I gotta go do my little round of pickups, right? So time is of the essence, right? And the phone rings, and I kind of recognize the phone number, and I usually don't pick up the phone if I only kind of recognize it. So kind of call me, I don't pick up. I kind of recognize the number. And I pick up the phone, and it's a parent from my daughter's preschool. My daughter's at the time was in kindergarten, class in kindergarten. And she calls and she says, son, I'm just calling to apologize. And I'm thinking, oh hell, what happened now? Because I don't know, right? And as it turns out, she shares this story that involved her white daughter and my African American child, right? And she says, her and another child were just playing in the playground. Now, they've known each other literally since they've been 3, right? Barely before, right? Known each other. They've been playing around in the playground, and then my daughter, Aliana, decides she doesn't want to play. Now, she's a middle child. She already got middle child issues. So she decides she's going to stop something. She's good, right? She got 2 other sisters. She play by herself. She'll play by them. She's good, right? So she's like, I'm done, and she starts to walk. White child number 1 says, Aliana is me. White child number 2 says, yes, she's me. She co-signs. No big deal, right? This is kindergarten. These kids are trying to figure stuff out, right? Fine, no big deal. She kept it a little bit needy, right? It's a middle child stuff. So she just cut somebody's head off of a picture. I'm like, what's going on here? So then I was like, okay, no, I can take that. I can live with that. Then white child number 1 says, she's mean because she's brown. She's mean because she's brown. And then the mother, white child number 2, she co-signed up, right? So she was called and saying, I'm sorry, she wasn't that. She's mean because she's brown. Like black woman anger is like one of the classic stereotypes, right? That date back to slavery. How did you pick that up at 5 and are able to articulate it and project it onto my child? That's because these stereotypes, these racial stereotypes persist. One of the reasons why we have to talk about this stuff with kids early on is because the stereotypes persist. And so the mother is telling me about all the things that they do and how around to make sure that those stereotypes are not embraced by their child, by her child. I'm like, yet they still persist. So you have to do more. We'll talk about what some of that more. Again, I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm experiencing this stuff. I saw some of the questions. I'm experiencing the same stuff with you all. Tackling the tough conversation. All right, do's and don'ts. Do's and don'ts. You start with the do's, I'm going to start with the don'ts. Here's the don't. There's only one. Don't avoid it. Don't, here's another double negative. Don't not have the conversation. Right? You'll remember that. Don't not have the conversation. You have to tackle it. You can't avoid it. Avoidance is not the answer. And I'm not talking about, now look, I feel the avoidance, right? Because my first reaction when that mother called me was, darn, and I didn't say darn, was darn, I now have to have this conversation with my daughter. Because I was concerned about where her head was and how she was feeling. And I was like, this is not a conversation that I wanted to have, that I hoped I wouldn't have to have, not in that way. But you have to have these conversations. So the do, there's only one do. That's do engage. Do it. You have to. And I just came up with this. Don't wait, inoculate. That might be the Brooklyn in me. I put that down. I'm like, I see talking about race and racism in particular as inoculation. And this isn't just something for children of color. This isn't only for white kids. This is for everybody. Right? Because racism impacts and affects everybody, although it will impact and affect them in different ways. I see the ways in which racism manifests in my children against other children of color, because they live in a world in which racism is pervasive, and so they internalize that. And so I know if it's in my kids, and I'm talking about like positive race consciousness all the time. I know it's going to be some other kids, but that's never happened. Right? But this is the inoculation. If racism is real and racism is in the world, if racism is a disease that can affect how your children interact with society, their mental health and their mental well-being, why would you not inoculate them against it? To do your best, because it's coming. So whether you're an African-American child or a child of color, ignoring it is not going to save them from being impacted by it. And if you're a white child or white parent with some white children, ignoring it is not going to keep them from embracing the views that the larger society still has. So you need to inoculate them as well. And then you do that by engaging, both in conversation and in experience. We'll talk about that. So 5 keys to the conversation. 5 keys to the conversation. 1, self-awareness of racial identity. This is important. If you enter these conversations with your children, you have to be clear and upfront about what your own racial identity is. Like you can have, if you're a white mother, you can have a conversation with your white child and you've never acknowledged to that child that you are white. Like you've never owned your whiteness. And if you're a black parent, you can't have a serious conversation with your child about racism if you are afraid of your own blackness. If you're dealing with those own stereotypes. White supremacist stereotypes that have affected so many of us. So you gotta have a positive race consciousness on the African American side. But you also have a positive race consciousness on the white side. It's like, well, I don't want to talk about race. I don't want this, that, and the other. If you're white, guess what? That's your race. You're white. Like, it's okay. Like, we all know you're white. But if your kids have never heard you say it, then what is the takeaway that they're getting? How are they supposed to understand and interact with other people who we racialize if we never allow them to actually acknowledge or see that we are comfortable in our own race? And again, that has to be taken apart, right? Biologically meaningless, culturally significant. And that needs to be explained. But if you never own it, white, black, Asian, Latino, and what it means in America, you can't have the conversation. Kids gonna look at you like whatever. And I get that look already. So you know what that look is. You know when your children have turned you off. They're like, Mom is talking about something that's crazy, and she don't want to talk about it, and I really don't want to hear it. That happens all the time. And they will recognize it. If you've never owned it, they don't want to hear it. Why are you telling me to own it if I've never seen you own it? So you have to be aware of it and articulate it. We'll talk more about other ways to do it. You have to listen. You're going to have this conversation, this difficult conversation. You have to listen to what your child is asking. And that, to a certain extent, is age dependent. Right? Are they in preschool? Are they in kindergarten? Are they in middle school, elementary school, or high school? Listen to what they're actually asking. Because sometimes what we hear isn't what they're actually asking. Now, you can think of different scenarios. A child may be asking about something or phrasing something in a particular way, right? Asking something about an incident may have happened in school. One thing I've heard talking to another group, and a parent said, my child was asking me about our neighbors. And so what were they asking about? They was asking me a series of questions about our neighbors, about where they work and where they live and all that and the other. I was like, oh, they were asking me why they were all white. It was every other possible criteria. And this white child was asking her parent, she was in a diversity class at school, right? And came home and was asking, why? This person, that person. And then finally, in the conversation ended. I was like, the child was asking, he said, why are our neighbors all white? The parent was here when the child was asking. Part because the child didn't have language. Like if you've never actually said white people in your house, are they going to say, why are all these white people here? Right? They use your vocabulary. They use your language. Right? And so we have to listen, if we haven't been giving them that language, to what they're actually asking. Because once you listen to what they're asking, then you can answer the question that they're asking. And when you answer that question, you have to answer truthfully and candidly. This is the hard part. This is hard for me, right? To answer questions truthfully and candidly. Because we fall back as parents back into that preservation of innocence mode. Maybe I can lessen the blow. Maybe I can soften it a little bit. That's actually doing a disservice to the child. Like, I don't think that we are in a situation now, moving forward, certainly weren't in the past, certainly not in it now, where softening the blow, lessening, being not as truthful or candid, is helping our children make sense of the world in which they live. And that's hard. Because what we think, because having those conversations, speaking honestly like that, truthfully and candidly, that's kind of painful. I feel like you're busting dreams. Like these are obstacles that a child can't overcome. These are feelings that aren't necessarily of a child's own making, yet they are there. Like that has to be explained. But we have to have the courage as parents to say, you know what? We have to explain this. Right? If your child was stricken, God forbid, with a serious disease, at what point do you go in and say, look, this is the situation. This is what you're facing. This is what you're up against. I'm here to help you get through it, and we'll get through it. But we can only do it, we can only be stronger if we know the actual situation and circumstances. And it's the same thing. We just have to have that courage and trust in our faith in our children that they'll accept all this. Answer in terms that they understand. Listen to their questions, figure out what they're actually asking, answer truthfully and candidly, and answer in terms that they can understand. I am not good at this. Because my default is, when my daughter asked me about Eric Garner, I'm like, oh, all right, so the transatlantic slave trade, right? And she's 4, right? I am not good at this, right? But the key here, and this is important, is the answers have to be sort of age dependent, right? And you have to answer in ways that children understand. Like that was, so, I mean, my Atlantic slave trade conversation that I've been practicing for many years just falls on deaf ears, right? And I'm just waiting for the end of high school or something, I can come back to it. It doesn't work. But they do understand different things. They understand the concepts. Like children understand inequality. They understand concepts of fairness. They understand when they're not being judged fairly, when they feel that they have not been judged fairly. They know when they've done something wrong. If somebody says something hurtful, your child says something hurtful, right? But they don't understand why that particular language they use was hurtful. Why why saying that a black child is mean because she's black, and not understanding quite why that's hurtful. Then you explain to them in a different context when they say something that is hurtful. And you say, that's the feeling. You use that language, that's the feeling that hurts. So there's always an alternative context that can be connected to, but you have to figure out what that language is, so that they will understand. And lastly, do the checking. Ask about the feelings, because children often communicate in terms of their feelings. Like, this is how I feel about this. But if we never check in, if we never ask, then you don't know if what you're saying is actually sinking in. Like sometimes, like this is the conversation that you have about sex with your kids, right? And I'm not there yet, and I'm praying mom will be. And it's like, you give the information, like this is what happened, this mommy, daddy, then you come, all right, any questions? No, bye, right? Walk away, I'm done, right? Same thing with racism. We're gonna lay this heavy stuff on them, they'll be like, okay, daddy's done, I'm walking away, right? Good luck with that, right? No, you gotta check in, right? And it's not, because it's not gonna be a one-off conversation. Do you understand what I'm saying? How are you feeling? Does this make any sense, right? Again, age appropriate, right? Well, high schoolers is gonna be different, right? I mean, you can have a more forthright conversation. How does that make you feel? Does this make any sense to you, right? I mean, those are the kinds of follow-up questions. And you have to be vulnerable yourself, right? You say, look, when I'm thinking about that, makes me sad. Right? Daddy is sad when I hear about that. Because you're also giving them permission to have a range of feelings about something that they're still confused about. You always have to check. All right, tough topics. How we doing on time? Oh yeah, we got 5 minutes. Oh, yeah. All right. So a couple quick things, and then we'll open up. With some of these tough topics, maybe we can tick off some of the questions, because I drew on some of them. As we should get right in. We'll get right in. Tough topics. Racial slurs. The N-word. So racial slurs are often, particularly in our schools, the ways in which racism manifests itself. So how do we have these conversations about racial slurs? I'll share it, but it may take my 5 minutes. I have to share the story. Y'all are higher brows. Y'all understand. I'm a New Yorker, right? So in New York, you don't grow up with college sports the way you do here in Central Ohio. I understand. I'm a sports fan, so I understand it. I've been here 16, 17 years, and people ask me, oh, are you a big Buckeye fan? I was like, no, I root for the Buckeyes. But I understand what true fandom is, right? Like, you gotta be born into this, right? Well, my children have been born into this sort of Buckeye fever, right? Born at Ohio State University Hospital, but they are full-on Buckeyes through and through, right? Daddy, turn on the game, right? What game? Like, they don't even know the game. I said game, you gotta turn it on. So, my oldest was 6 years old at the time, she was 5 years old at the time, and she had gotten into Blackish, right? TV show Blackish. And I was a Cosby Generation person, and I had actually reintroduced the kids to Cosby. I mean, it's phenomenal material on there, right? But then this whole Cosby thing came up, I was like, I couldn't do it anymore, right? So we had to nix that. So you had to find something else. Blackish is a little bit more mature, it's a little bit more modern, right? So my wife and I, we would watch it first, and then if we could sort of finesse it and get away with it, we would let them watch it, right? My 5-year-old. So they had this episode, the first episode, season of 2015, If anybody who's watching, this was an N-word episode where one of the children is going to sing this song, right? I think it's a Kanye West song that has the N-word in it, right? And so he goes in and he starts, they bleep it out, right? But it's the N-word, it's clear, it's obvious. So we see this episode and we're like, okay, kids ain't watching this, right? And so we leave town. Wife and I went somewhere and left them with grandma. As soon as we come back, as soon as I walk in the door, right, Asha, my oldest, comes up and says, Daddy, we watched the episode. Next line. What's the N-word? I'm like, go talk to your mama, right? What's the N-word? I am not ready for this conversation whatsoever. I am in no way ready for this conversation. Right? I mean, that's heavy, right? And I am not ready for this conversation. And I hemmed and hawed and danced around it, and finally I was like, we're not talking about this, right? I mean, I full on shut down the conversation because I wasn't ready, right? I was like, we're not saying it. It's a word we don't say. Like I was full on authoritative voice, Daddy, no, right? And we are not doing this right now. And so, she fussed and carried on. Then we were done, right? And then she goes off to school, kind of forgets about it. Daddy, can I say, no, it's a little good. A couple months go by. So this is in September. A couple months come by. She comes home from school, and out of nowhere, she says, Daddy, I know what the N-word is. And I was like, no, you don't. She said, I'm trying to buy time, right? I'm to stall. She says, yes, I do. I know what the N-word is. And I know why you didn't want to tell me. All right. Well, I was like, I'm not a big drinker, but I wish I had a drink right there, right? I'm like, okay, I'm thinking about all the things. I'm like, all right, transatlantic slavery talk. Where we got to go. And so I said, okay, sit down. I was like, all right, tell me what the N-word is. And she says, I can't because I'm not allowed to say it. I'm like, oh, you're killing me now, sis, right? Like, I can't because I'm not allowed to say it. And I was like, all right. Like, you have my permission. Again, this is how 5-year-olds deal with stuff, right? You have my permission to say it once. And she's like, I won't get in trouble. I was like, no, you will not get in trouble. You can say the N-word once and then we'll have a conversation about it. But you only say it once, and we'll go from there. And she says, okay. So stands up. Michigan. She said the M-word is Michigan. And I was like, go blue. I was like, yes. The M-word is Michigan. She's like, and we should never say it. And I was like, we should never say it. Never in this house. Under any circumstances, we never say the M-word. And I was like, oh, Jesus, thank you. I've never been a happier for Michigan, Michigan. Right? But the N-word, I mean, that speaks to, I seriously did not want to have that conversation. Because there's so much there. Right? I mean, it hurts the soul. Right? So two things when we really do have to have these conversations with our kids, right? When we're having them with African American children of color, we have to explain the history of it. Right? Like, this is what it means. And it becomes complicated because now it's used in common parlance, right? You hear it in music. I can't play. I mean, I'm ready. I want to have the N-word conversation now with my children so I can stop listening to Kids Pop Radio. Right? So it has this, that has to be explained to you. Like, why do people use it? Right? And why do some say it's okay for black people to use it and white people not to use it? And what does that mean? Right? And again, that has to be a frank conversation. Right? Both with children of color and with white children. Because the answer to my children is, I don't want to hear you using it at all. Period. And we just need to get rid of it. But this is why people do use it. Right? They do see it as an alternative, meaning, right? It's sort of robbing it of its power because that's what oppressed people do. With slurs, all people do that. How do you explain that to a 5-year-old? Right? So you're just like, look, we don't do it because it's hurtful. And this is what somebody says, you're ugly, how do you feel, right? So again, you walk them through that. But with our older kids, we hear older kids now, so she might be like, look, I'm singing it in the music, right? If they say it, I say it. So she don't like it. guess what? I don't care, right? Because that connects into white privilege. Like, how do you explain that? That's the way to do it. Like, don't do it. I have the First Amendment right. Not in this house. Right? And this isn't about semantics. That's a racial slurs hurt. They're painful. And they are used to degrade. And when they come out of the mouths of people who are not in that group, they hurt. Because they dehumanize. And the history behind that kind of language has led to people's deaths. So it's not to be used lightly. And just saying, well, they said it, so I can say it, is not acceptable. It's something that we just need to get rid of completely. And so that conversation with our kids ought to be shut down. Whatever the racial slur is, we just move away from it completely. I'll hit a couple more. So, the tough topics of racial slurs is, this is what they are. This is what they mean, and this is why we don't use them. And if you don't use them, they won't use them. But you can't use them and then expect them not to use them and get mad when they come home or you hear them in the room saying this, that, and the other. Where'd you get that? You. So you have to walk that walk in your house, right? Because they're modeling your behavior. We have kids going crazy. They're modeling the behavior of their parents. And so explaining white privilege, this is a tough one, right? Because at the heart of white privilege, when this came up in a number of the questions, is so who's to blame? Racism exists. It's real in society. Well, am I to blame for inequality? Like, no, you individually are not to blame for inequality, right? But racism exists. That's a burden to be shouldered by society as a whole. But you also have to understand, right? Depending upon who you are, if you are white and it means how your whiteness can work in your favor. How your whiteness confers certain advantages to you solely because you are white. And we will talk about, I hope we're talking about some gender privilege. We need to be having a conversation about gender privileges. We're talking about seeing what's going on with the Supreme Court nomination in Capitol. Like, men don't think about sexual assault. Not in the way that women have to. That's part of our gender privilege. We don't have to think about it. We go outside, it's dark, it's dark. We don't worry about being drunk or who might take something like that's a gender privilege. Well, there are equivalent privileges that people get because of their white. And the lack of certain privileges that people get because they're not. Right? And that also is part of that tough conversation. And it's not about blame. Because you can talk to your kids and be like, well, why did this happen? Like, why did this happen? And then that's that sort of when race doesn't make any sense. It's like you had nothing to do with it. But it impacts you. And so if kids don't understand, on the white side of things, the white side of the color line, if white kids don't understand white privilege, the ways in which they are afforded certain opportunities, or certain things are not held against them, and other members of the society, then they really don't understand how racism works in society. And when you don't understand that, then you wind up blaming people for things that aren't their own fault. Why couldn't you do that? Why couldn't you get ahead? How do you explain that? One of the best ways, maybe it's an Ohio thing, but also it is one of the best ways to talk about sort of privilege, white privilege, the lack of privilege that children of color may have because of that, or socioeconomic privilege, is to talk about something that they do and enjoy, some type of activity, right, that they have an opportunity to engage in, right, whether it's sports, gymnastics, or music, because you can usually say, well, how come this person, if somebody never took piano, would they be able to play it? Aside from the genes, well, they might be able to, but it wouldn't be that good. So why is it that you're able to play so well? Well, because I practice. Well, where's the piano? We bought it from you, right? We pay for lessons. Right? Like, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you gotta have piano lessons. Right? right, in the book of raising children, right? That's your privilege and opportunity. And if you did not have that, you would not be able to play. If daddy and mommy won't take you on these road trips to play sports, you wouldn't be as good as you are. So there's ways to connect so that, again, they understand what it means to have privilege, and then you associate it back to sort of race in society. And that in a way that they will understand. Identifying race and racism. These two things, it's important that kids understand that there's a difference between personal prejudice, what you actually individually express, sort of beliefs that can be prejudicial, that can be biased. But then there's also systemic racism, ways in which racial discrimination is embedded into the systems and structures of our society. Now that becomes complicated, right? That you can't, to an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, let me explain to you institutional racism, right? I mean, that language doesn't work, right? But however you know that you connect with your children, you have to, and however old they are, you have to make them understand that there's a difference between individual actions and personal prejudice and the larger ways in which racism and bias may exist in our system and society. That's a critical part of any conversation that you have on racism. Distinguishing between cultural appropriation and cultural celebration. This is the way you distinguish it. Do this, don't do that, right? Cultural celebration, celebrate other people's culture, right? This is diversity. Right? And so if you are not of that culture, it is fine to celebrate that culture. But it's celebrated in part by studying it, by appreciating it, by acknowledging its differences, by taking the time to appreciate its history, the way it has evolved. And then if you are in a space where you have folk who are of that culture, then engaging them, right, in the ways that they feel is culturally appropriate to celebrate their culture, their particular culture. And if you are in a space where they are not, celebration isn't mocking. And celebration is not appropriation, which we take and reflect without a sense of its history, without a sense of its meaning, without a sense of the sacrifice that a people belonging to a culture made for that culture to develop these particular practices. So we have to celebrate, but we have to be mindful not to appropriate, not to stereotype, not to mimic, right? That doesn't mean that before you do anything you seek permission. It's that, no, you use common sense, right? And if it's done with sincerity, the cultural group will appreciate it. They will appreciate it. I still am in a fraternity, right? Then, you get an African American tradition, all African American fraternity. It's like, that's cool. We do these things, step shows, and I did my step shows with this, that, and the other. When you have it with times when you would see a white fraternity or white members doing a step show, it's like, all right, where y'all coming from? Hey, what's happening here, right? I mean, you checking it out. And if they were coming from a place of honesty and appreciation and recognition of the cultural heritage and what that meant and how that came about, in the end, it would be cool. But that had to be demonstrated, right? That had to be demonstrated. Avoiding the color brown trap. Now, I think I'll end here. I'll end with the color question. I'm used to that. I think it's back then, right? I mean, I probably would ignore it anyway. Avoiding the colorblind trap. Avoiding the colorblind. This is what we cannot do, right? And if not, when you have this conversation with our kids, and you're talking about you have to be clear and explicit about these topics, you got to avoid the colorblind trap. That is saying that I don't see race. I'm colorblind. Because I don't want you not to see my race. What I want you to do is not discriminate against me because of my race. But I want you to see my race. Again, because of that cultural component. Right? Race stands in as a substitute for our culture in American society. So I want you to see it. I want you to acknowledge it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's that, but when you project onto it those personal prejudices, that's when it becomes a problem. But when we talk about colorblindness, well, we don't see race, I teach my children not to see race, this, that, and the other, you know what happens? When you say that, you wind up with that little girl telling my daughter that she's mean because she's afraid. Because you've been telling her all this time not to see race. And you know what society says? See race. You know what they see all the time? Race. And by you saying, well, we strive not to, we're not there yet as a society at all, because we still attribute these values to it. Right? We are not a race-neutral society by any stretch of the imagination. And so we have to be clear and upfront, especially with our children. So it is fine to recognize and acknowledge a knowledge of a person's race, as long as we're understanding the difference between the biology and the culture and the life. Like, you have to. So when I had, I'll just do this, when I had that white mother call me, and she was sincere, right? The other thing, I was hurt, she was hurt, her kid was hurt, I was worried about how my kid felt. I wanted to get on the phone. I only had a couple more minutes before I had to go get the kids. And I wasn't thinking about a kid anymore, right? Just be honest, I was thinking about, well, where was my child, right? And where was her head? And why the teacher had told me certain stories. So she asked me, she knew I do these kinds of workshops and say African American. She said, well, if you have just a second, what is it that I can do, right? Because we talk about this stuff, we talk about being colorblind, we talk about, everybody being equal, this, that, and the other. She had all the right language. Right? I could hear her, sincere, she was sure, all of the right language. And she lives out here. And I said, look, I really have to go. She said, no, I really appreciate it. I said, oh, I kind of got a little frustrated. I got a little short. That's okay. God. And I said, does your daughter have any black dogs in her house? And she said, no. I said, has your daughter had any black friends over at her house? Have you had any black people at your house? She said no. Has she ever been in an environment where there were a lot of black people? Like, not even a majority, just a lot. And she said no. I said, well, what the hell do you think she's going to do? You're telling her one thing, but living something completely different. You're saying color and race doesn't matter, and yet you're living a life that shows her that race does matter, because nobody of any other race has ever interacted with them, except the handful of black children in the school. And they become exceptions until they draw on a stereotype. She said, well, what can I do? What kind of race? Go buy some black dogs. Sprinkle black children around the house. Like, it's not that hard. And then take your child to black spaces. Right? It's insufficient to say, we live in this white world, and therefore I cannot, find black people. Look in the phone book, right? Google black people. Go to a predominantly black neighborhood, to a black playground, you'll find black people, children, like playing in a playground in black neighborhoods. They do that, right? Like, you can do that. I said, do that. And I said, if you don't want to do that, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, go to a black church. There's a lot of black people at black churches, and they'll welcome you with open arms. But the power of being in that space, I was like, you have to match the action, the experience, with the rhetoric. It is not enough to have any of these conversations and then go back to our silos, to go back to our all black worlds, or mixed world, or all white worlds. Like, we have to show our children how we interact, like what equality means, what anti-racism means. And be mindful that they are watching all the time how we interact with black people who we know and who we don't know. Who comes to our house? What kind of shows do we watch? Who's on the walls of our house? And all of that is sending direct messages to our children. So you have never had any black people in your house for 15 years, and then you come home and your child's 15 and she drops an N-bomb, you're like, where'd that come from? You? We were giving all these signals, yeah, but you gave the wrong signals. Shit, that was rhetoric, not meaningful action. So we have to pair the two. We have the conversation, but we also have to do the action. Because the world itself is constantly bombarding all of our children with these messages about racial stereotypes. And they're still there, and they are still very strong. And we're in a place now where we can tend to mitigate against sort of individuals. We bring black individuals into our house and handle white individuals, but we still maintain those stereotypes about them. That's where we want to go. With black folk, we adore, whether we know them personally or we know them just figuratively because they're actresses and actors and things that we like. The characteristics that we like in other people, we project onto members of those groups who we don't know. That's when we know that our children are making that progress. That's when we know that we're making that progress. With those characteristics, we know when the people who we know of a different racial group, we project that onto people. When you see that kid with the hoodie, you don't think of a criminal you don't know. You don't think of him as a danger. You just think of him as a young kid. As the next LeBron James. Somebody you wouldn't mind getting an autograph from, rather than money. I'll open it up to questions. All right.
And this is my first of all, I want to thank you. It is 7:30 and out of
Yeah, no, I'm good. I drove all the way up here. Come on, so I remember.
Out of respect for everyone here, we'll take just 60 seconds, a brief minute to let anyone that needs to leave at this time leave, because we know they have families and responsibilities to get home to. We will extend the time to 7:45 to include the Q&A that was originally within this section. So if anyone would like to take just a minute, we'll regroup, and I guess we can just open it up to the audience.
Yeah, that's okay.
Left a while back, probably 10 minutes ago. just so you know.
He left a lot.
When you,
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
you left at 7:25. As I was waiting, because you said, I'm going to give a couple minutes for questions, you left at 7:25. It's fine, but I'm just saying, I just felt like it would be good for us to be able to have these conversations with you.
I'm sorry. The district did send us an email, at least I received an email saying that these are public facilities that they're supposed to rent out. It's not because they have any preferential Democratic or Republican preference. It's just that because these are public facilities, they are.
Okay, why did they fly the Trump flag on school property and sell Trump propaganda on school property?
I would say
I was there.
we absolutely hear, I think that was a time where it was very, very, very charged feelings on both sides. And that's definitely something that we can still talk through, but I do want to make sure that we stay on the topic and use his expertise as far as talking to our kids about race. The comment with Superintendent Ray, he had 2 obligations tonight and he wanted to make sure that he was here for as long as he could be. But I do want to see if we could keep the conversation as far as using his expertise to further the conversation that he started with the content. I do hear you, and we can certainly answer some of those afterwards from a district perspective.
Well, I'm going to call you in a second. Before I do, just to respond in brief, again, I can't speak to the internal politics here. But one of the things that I didn't get to the next point, was action. Like it's not enough to leave our children saying, this is the problem, this is the issue, how you feel, this, that, and the other. Right? That will invariably leave them hollow if you don't say, this is what you need to do about it. Right? And in many instances, that is raising the voice. I mean, one of the things that we have to do, I think, as parents too, is say, how do you make a difference? Right? How can children not feel powerless? Now that's not the politics of who's coming, who's not coming, decisions and how they're being made. I have no idea how that plays out here, right? But I do know how social movements work. And I do know the history of young people being engaged in activism and allowing and creating space and telling our children there is always something that you can do. Now, that might not lead to the immediate change that you want, but that tells them that there's always an option. Right? There's always a way to register a complaint, to file a protest, to express themselves and their voice when a particular issue comes up that they absolutely feel comfortable. I feel what you're saying. Like, I'm not a victim. That's not my number one dude either. And so I would be, if I was in the district, I'd probably feel exactly the way you feel. But part of it is, okay, how do you model that for your child? Right? Drawing on that conversation, explaining why it's hurtful, explaining why this doesn't make sense, explaining why you disagree. And then also explain, so, okay, this is what the administration said. This is their decision. Now, how do you feel about that? Does that make sense to you? And then now, what do you think you can do about it? Do you leave them not feeling good? You don't ever want the child to feel helpless. And helplessness is real, right? Every time I turn on MSNBC, I feel helpless. So trying to protect our children and giving them some, even the small stuff, right? That you need to write somebody, right? I'm gonna show you how to write a letter, right? Again, doesn't always, if they make their response, they don't get a response. Did you get a response yet? No, we'll write another. And again, it's the small thing that make it good. Because you then build on your scaffold. Next thing you know, that needs revolution. Yes.
So I'm also a New Yorker, so different. But the question I have is, so having grown up in New York, as you can echo, I think you felt racism, but definitely not to the extent that you can feel it possibly here, just because it was like a blend of like what your class looked like, and I have 2 African American daughters, and we had an instance where my daughter was told they didn't like her because her skin was brown. So she's at the time was 5, now 6. So I guess for me, I'm guilty in that I try to teach my kids to be colorblind, because in a way I felt that's how I grew up. Being Puerto Rican, like, yeah, we're proud of that, but also, like, my parents never really said, well, this one's this one's that, so you hang out with them who don't. You just kind of hung out with everybody. But now where we live, my children definitely are not the majority. And I'm just trying to figure out, instead of perpetuating the colorblind, oh honey, no, don't pay attention to it, where do you find like age-appropriate resources to have those conversations with very young children?
And I think there's two things to think about, and two ways. And I'm glad you asked that question. One is there are books, right? And so increasingly the number of children's books in the Bible, and I can share some of those with you. So that's the Bible. Children in the early elementary grades. But a lot of them are about sort of self-esteem, right? So part of it is sort of self-esteem, and that's the inoculation, right? Like, no, you're not mean because you're brown skin. That doesn't, you're not ugly because of that, right? So some of it is like self-esteem building, right? Which is important, right? So that they are secure in who they are, because the world is saying that being black is not beautiful, right? I mean, that's standard of beauty is still very European, still very white, right? They got to and all that. Little black girls with my hair not long enough. Like, I understood the hair thing theoretically. And then you get real by age 3. And I was like, damn, I can deal with this, right? I mean, so it's a self-esteem stuff. But there really aren't a lot, this is what you as a parent do have a lot of heavy lifting. There really aren't a lot of good, young, child appropriate for that age group books that sort of explain like racism, right? Like you can get some biography stuff. And I swear I experiment with them all the time. Right? Okay, you're gonna be a slavery child, you're gonna be a civil rights child, right? Like, but if I teach you this, like what happens with that? Right? I mean, so this is one of the children's books about Rosa Parks, right? Like as a like not just as a title lady, but as a young, like a little girl, and like fighting for her freedom, right? Like yeah, you can be like Rosa, right? I mean, so there's stuff that shows, sort of explains the ways in which you can act, right? So on the one hand, you want the self-esteem stuff, right? On the other hand, you want the, it's not you, but then there's also space and ways for you to contest and combat this, right? Like that's really important. Those are far fewer. I'm thinking about the Rosa Parks because that's a book that's kind of my go-to, right? Let's go back to Little Rosa, right? Like that's the girl. So like there's books like that. And as they get a little older, I think it's important to sort of introduce the history to them. Right? This is where that hard past, it's like we can't avoid it. Like we gotta explain that. Because that's what explains what's going on today. Like that's all, I mean, we haven't left that in the past. So the only way to explain why the neighbors would say that to her, in reality, is to kind of walk back into the past. Because it's not personal. Right? That's society. So that you gotta take the time to sort of explain. And when they get a little older, but really around the third grade, my oldest is now in third grade, and she'll sit down and watch like PBS documentaries. So she's 8 years old, and she'll sit down and watch, and she'll ask questions. Right? Sometimes she won't ask, sometimes it'll be a day or two later. She might watch 15 or 20 minutes, and then she'll move on. But there are some really age-appropriate, I mean, even some of the heavy stuff. Again, that's the slavery child, right? So like, all right, the heavy stuff, right? But it doesn't have to be that heavy, but there's some good stuff about, and especially like the resistance and how people organize, right? Because it's like, man, some people didn't, like that's what happened with Kanye West. Right? No one ever told them that black people resisted slavery. So he going around here like, black people resisted slavery. I mean, they had a choice. No, black people were slavery. No one ever gave them a history lesson. Like, this is the history teacher. Right? Like, you understand that? Like, you gotta draw on history to explain what's going on in the present. You can't be that in the past. That's and then in the films as they get a little older, she's right at that cusp. There's some good documentaries, PBS and all this good stuff, right? Because all that does is raise questions. It provides answers, but it raises more questions. Then you go from one to the other. Okay, and I'll stick around for a little bit.
I have a question. The kind of speaks probably a little bit about private practice, but I think that's all the children and stuff. My concern is that our children aren't seeing any black representation raise the level of cognitive dissonance. I'm really
You're absolutely dead on. And it's not just for children of color. Again, it's like how does the community actually walk this walk, right? Because you're saying all people are equal, and yet all people aren't represented in positions of authority, right? That works against what you're saying. Right? So that has to be a collective community decision to be like, look, this is me. Like, at least give me some posters to speak, right? But it can't be all white. Like nobody benefits from that. It has to be active engagement, right? To bring in people of color, right? Because then this is the thing that white families have to deal with, but certainly black families in white communities have to deal with, right? That if you don't have people of color, then family is not enough. Because what happens is family becomes the exception. Right? So black families, like middle class families, black families, the majority of my neighbors have to deal with this. Like, because like why are my children echoing these racist sort of stereotypes? Right? They have all of us family. Well, the family becomes something different. The family becomes the exception. That's the same thing to a white family that has just one or two black folk because they in their circle because they become exceptional. And the stereotypes still persist. That's why it's incumbent upon the community to say, look, we need to have broad representation. If our school board, if our teachers, if our school positions of authority are too white, that's a poor reflection of us. I grew up in New York, in Flatbush, Brooklyn. I didn't have a black, I had one, this is New York City. New York City. Through high school, elementary school, 12th grade, I had 2 black teachers. In my entire education. 2. Like, what does that say about the authority? I had family members who were teachers, so I understood sort of educational path, right? But then that was unacceptable. Like because if you don't model it, it's not possible. Not only for black children, but then also for white children to see that that they can recognize college. I'll say this last thing. When I go into a classroom at Ohio State University, and I teach African American history and U.S. history, and people always assume that all my students are black, right? The majority of my students are black. I'm like, have you been to Ohio State? So I will have a class of 75 people, and 65 of them will be white. From suburbs, rural parts of Ohio, right? So 65 students are white. And I will go in and I have to remind myself that for those white kids, as well as for the black kids, they have never been in a position where they had a person of color who was an authority figure above them. Never. These are kids in college. Ever. I remember the first time I sort of realized that, and I asked them, I was like, have you ever had a teacher, an African American male teacher? And then like, everybody's hand went up. I was like, man, I guess the rest of them up. And then I was like, oh wait, before me. You know, but it's about what's possible, right? I mean, that's why it's not, when we talk about diversity, that's where's the last thing. When we talk about diversity and why the work that they're doing is important, although it's not, it doesn't complete, it doesn't answer everything, it's always a step, it's always a bridge to something else. But why it's so important, it's not just because we want to have people around, right? There's nothing magical. Like for white people, there's nothing magical about having black people around. Like, I know they can dance a little bit. And when we think about integration, right? Like people always thought, black people wanted integration of schools, right? It's like, no, what they wanted was access to resources. And they knew that resources followed white children. Like they were fine in predominantly black schools, they were just resource poor. Right? So there's nothing magical for white people, right? Except the ability to attract the flow of tax dollars and resources, right? And so diversity isn't about just bringing people together just for the sake of them being in the same room. It's for the exchange of ideas. It's for the experience so that kids will see the world differently. They benefit from that. And that begins at home by explaining, by talking about in real and candid ways. These are the opportunities, these are the possibilities, and these are the pitfalls. This is what's going to happen, right? And it's going to be confusing because you don't know if it's because of racism or something else, right? You don't know if you're feeling this because of racism or something else. Like it's crazy, and you got to work it through. But it's easier to work through if you have different people from different backgrounds and cultures and communities, right? Because that's when you learn. That's when you have that candid conversation. You learn from other people. You learn from saying really smart things, and you learn from saying really dumb things, right? But you learn, right? Because people, they're like, nah, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, no, that's not why you do that. But you got to be in the room and in positions of authority so people can see that and respect that authority, especially when people are color and they're women, right? And all of that. If you never had a woman, right? Women tend to be teachers, go beyond just teachers, right? It's like, that's what they do. They don't do anything else. That diversity really is, right? Not just to feel good, make people comfortable, but because we learn, we become better people. Everybody becomes better when we diversify. All right.